to bring our first reading from Scripture this morning. Thank you, Tricia.
The first reading is taken from Isaiah chapter 2, verses 2 to 5. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many people will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." Then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." He said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, I only realised this morning, in fact, that those two readings we've had from Isaiah and Revelation are about as far apart in the Bible as you could get, really, certainly in terms of history. They are about as far apart as the age of our church, 800 years. It's as if reading something written today and reading something from the 13th century. And yet you notice, I hope, that they do share a common vision. It's a vision of a cast iron promise and guarantee and certainty from God's perspective that one day all wars, all injustice, all pain, all suffering and sadness and loss will end forever. That is obviously the deep cry of our hearts in the midst of so much pain and suffering and sadness and loss and so on. Particularly in the uncertainties of what it means to live in the early parts of the 21st century. We come to a day like today, as I said at the start, wanting to honour those who've made sacrifices, but feeling certainly I feel the sort of tension in that. We recognise gallantry and bravery, but in no sense do we want to sort of lionise war itself. To get kind of jingoistic, even worse, about wars that we have fought as a nation. So when we hear in these readings, as Isaiah chapter 2 verse 4 puts it, "He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore." Well, we long for that to be the case. And if it's a promise that God makes, I suppose we're asking, When's it going to happen? When's he going to do it? Longing for war to be over always comes home to me on a day like today, when you dip into some of the names of the people that we've remembered just a few moments ago. We hear them as names with initials. Martin Horder, a member of our church, has been exploring, along with a number of others, some of the history of our church, and particularly he's found references to various of the people on our war memorial, and others who we remember in other ways. They have plaques or they have a grave outside. And their names appear in our parish magazine, what's now called the Edgbastonian. It's very poignant because around, obviously, 1940, some of these names appear, first of all, as missing in action, and then later the truth comes out. It's those repeated names, perhaps you heard them, that particularly sort of hit home. Some of them, E.F. Shaw, turns out wasn't related to H.L. Shaw, but you can read E.F. Shaw's story. She was the only woman in her regiment to die in World War II. You can read about it in the Edgbastonian this month. But of course, no doubt you heard the Danielsons. June 1940, in the church magazine, P.J. Danielson, as we hear him, Peter, declared missing in action. May 1942, C.H., Christopher, Peter's brother, also missing, presumed killed at the time of that announcement. Then December 1943, G.F.C., George, their cousin, missing, confirmed dead a little while later. Even that slightest bit of extra information tells you that we're talking about people who sat where you're sat right now. People who read the church magazine. Families, obviously, and a church waiting anxiously for news, fearing the worst, and then, at least in some cases, hearing the very worst. In a world like that, the cast-iron guarantee that the Bible gives us across its pages, that one day there'll be no more need for the obituary pages. There'll be no more need for arms manufacturers. There'll be no more cemeteries or funeral directors. There won't be any more vicars either. And remembrance will be shorn of all sadness. If that were true, if we could believe that, then it would be a help, wouldn't it, when we think about some of the pain and loss of our world. The writer Fyodor Dostoevsky has one of his characters in one of his novels say, "I believe like a child that suffering will be healed and made up for. That in the world's finale, at the moment of eternal harmony, something so precious will come to pass that it will suffice for all hearts, for the comforting of all resentments, for the atonement of all the crimes of humanity, of all the blood they have shed." That is a good news thing to hear in the context of a world at war, at conflict, experiencing pain and loss daily. But you may well have noticed in the reading that chapter 2, verse 4, with that extraordinary picture and promise, it actually comes halfway through the reading. And the first half of it, and the bit that I think verse 4 is kind of linked to and depends on, is all about the God of Israel being exalted. Did you hear it? In the last days, chapter 2, verse 2, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. That's a picture in the ancient world. If you had the highest mountain and you had your God on the top of it, well, he was the top God. So it's a bit of a boastful claim that Isaiah is writing there. The promise for the future is not just the end of all wars, but that his God, the God of Israel, would be top, would be unchallenged and the ruler of all. Goes on in the reading to talk about people coming to worship this God from beyond the borders of Israel. So it's like saying, not only have we got the top God, not only is our God the highest, but everyone in the world is going to stream to him and worship him. And it doesn't skip a beat from that sort of thing to talking about him bringing justice. And this might well feel more problematic for us. We all want the end of all wars. But why does Isaiah insist on binding that together with the exaltation of the God of Israel? The late Christopher Hitchens was a brilliant commentator and thinker. He was one of the new atheists. And he was in debate once with a Christian apologist. And he was challenged. to sort of thinking about, like, is religion good for the world? Hitchens was challenged in the debate. He said, imagine you were in a strange city you didn't know, and evening was approaching. And as you were walking down a street, you looked up and you saw a group of men approaching. And Hitchens was asked, now, would you feel more safe or less safe if you learned that that group of men were coming from a prayer meeting? You can kind of see what the Christian was trying to suggest. Look, religion is good for the world. It will make you feel safer. Here is Hitchens' response. Just to stay within the letter B, I have actually had that experience in Belfast, Beirut, Bombay, Belgrade, Bethlehem, and Baghdad. And in each case, I can say absolutely, and can give my reasons where I would feel immediately threatened if I thought that the group of men approaching me in the dusk were coming from a religious observance. It's a great piece of rhetoric, but the point, obviously, is more than mere rhetoric. Don't need to go into details about all those places beginning with the letter B, places where religion has seemed to deepen conflict. So there's a bit of a tension in our reading. We want the end of all wars, but this stuff about the mountain of the Lord being exalted, about people flooding to worship him, how's that actually going to help? Might it not even hinder the end of all wars? Just two suggestions for you as to why actually the first part of chapter 2 is bound so closely with the end of all wars. The first is that while we might think that the end of all wars, full stop, is all we want, actually, we need more than that. We need that, but we also need justice. It's quite hard to think about this when you live in the moment that we live in, where basically we've been in peace and safety within our country at least for a long time, for most of our lifetimes, not all, but for most. The Croat theologian Miroslav Volf has been the single biggest help to me to think about what we actually want when we want the end of all wars. As I said, he's a Croat, and so he lived through some of the horrors of the Balkans at the end of the 20th century. And particularly in the sort of academic circles, he's a kind of academic theologian that he moved in, there was a lot of talk of, look, we cannot be having any of this kind of exclusive, sort of violent judgment from God. That's not going to help us at all as we move beyond the horrors we've experienced as countries. But actually, he said, look, that sort of language is the sort of language you hear from people who are kind of closeted in safe Western ivory towns. Coercive love. Soon you would discover that it takes the quiet of a suburban home for the birth of the thesis that human non-violence corresponds to God's refusal to judge. In a scorched land soaked in the blood of the innocent, it will invariably die. We might instinctively think that a God who just brings peace, full stop, who just ends it all and is committed to non-violence, that's what we need. Wolf is saying, when you've been through the horrors of the Balkans in the 1990s, or Europe in World War II, and so on and so on, you actually need more than that. You need someone who can bring justice completely and fully. It's what people need to hear when they've seen horrors, when they've experienced them themselves. Their own family members, their own communities torn apart. You need someone who can fully and completely right those wrongs and call to account those who have done those things. The very dignity of every human being demands that you don't just sort of push it all to one side and say, we're done with that, we're not going to have that anymore. But that there is justice. That's the first reason why we need more than the end of all wars. The second, we need more than that because we need justice, but the sort of justice that the God of Isaiah 2 will bring, bound up with sacrifice. Because that's what's so striking about this picture of God ending all wars that we get across the Bible, across those 800 years and more. we find God is not just committed to ending all wars, but he is committed not just even to bringing the end justly, but to meeting that bar of justice in his own self. That is the only answer that can make any sense for me of what we're doing on a day like today. Someone who doesn't just end wars and end it justly, but pays for war justly himself, if you like. Who pays the consequences of our complete rejection of him and turning away from him and turning in on ourselves and turning against one another, if we will accept it in his own self, in his own Son, on the cross. God's justice in the Bible is always bound up with his self-sacrifice. And that's what makes sense of why we find stories of sacrifice today so moving. Because we do, don't we? And that's when we're tempted to lionize them. The Danielson brothers and cousin. E.F. Shaw, R.C. Mason, if you know the stories, you can read some in the Edge Custodian. They move you when you hear about people just willingly going to give their lives so that we can live in freedom. That is just a little echo in each of those cases of the way that, according to the Bible, God has done that very thing to the utmost. Meeting the bar of justice in himself so that he can end all injustice fairly and rightly and welcome into his family anyone who will entrust their lives to him. There is nothing like it, as far as I can see, in any other religion or philosophy in the world, to say that the God, the Creator God, steps in and then is killed in the most brutal way so that he can welcome us in to his family. Far from being the problem. Actually, this stuff about God being raised up and exalted in the highest mountain is actually the vital part of the solution. Because it tells us of a God who's not just going to sweep all that aside, but end all wars justly and fairly. As we finish, we're going to watch a short video. It's a spoken word poem that helps us consider this extraordinary twist at the heart of the good news of Jesus.
If I should die, think only this. A bullet flew by that did not miss. What story of the war is told? Romance bright or horror cold? Triumph's tale or tragic loss? The iron or the wooden cross? Lost lament or victor's boast? Full brass band or lone last post? Heroes, villains, cowards, kings, it's war. It's all these things. It's us, unleashed for good and ill, the gallant heart, the savage will, a Kaiser's pride, a nation's fear, a global greed. It's all in here. What causes war? The old book asks. Beyond the history, beneath the masks, begins a want, becomes a will, demands its way, prepares to kill. The wars we mark as long ago are close to home. They're all we know. What ceases war? The pressing question. What can halt inborn aggression?
To end all wars and retribution, war itself is no solution. Can terror end all terror now? Brute force subdue itself and bow? Can darkness drive out darkened dread? Or death extinguish death instead?
We need to interrupt the spiral, find the antiretroviral. The story's told of Anti-Zeus, a god of peace, made human truce. Into our world, into our midst, a walking, talking armistice. A king now meek, his power made weak, to stand and turn the other cheek. To take the blow, absorb disgrace, then rise to give again his faith in grace undimmed and arms unfurled, to bless and pacify the world. And you, to sweet surrender brought, forgiveness for your battles fought, peace to pass to every soul, then warfare ceased from pole to pole.
We're going to stand and sing our offertory hymn, O